Today I want to report the inside story of one of the most powerful men in America. He's not the President of the United States, nor is he Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, nor a member of the Cabinet, nor head of General Motors. He's Dave Beck, head of the biggest union in the world, the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, Chauffeurs, Warehousemen, and Helpers. Now, I don't mean to say that Dave Beck is more powerful than the President, but perhaps ahead of anyone outside of government. Dave Beck exercises more power over more lives than anyone else I know. He can, if he desires, tie the economic life of the United States into knots. So let's take a look at the head of the biggest union in the world, the only union, incidentally, which came out officially for the Republicans in the last election. I'll report the inside story of Dave Beck in just a minute. Now, it happens that Dave Beck is much more unpopular in the ranks of labor than outside of labor. Other labor leaders, particularly George Meany, head of the AFL-CIO, just don't like him for several reasons. First, he invades their jurisdiction, goes through their picket lines, has been called the worst strike breaker in America. They also don't like Beck's boast that he built the most ornate labor headquarters in Washington right across the street from the Capitol in order to keep an eye on Congress. And they feel that corruption among some Teamsters gives a black eye to all of labor. Finally, they resent the fact that Beck took 3 trips to Europe in 2 months, apparently to dodge a Senate investigation. For a time, Beck hid out in room 11 in a swank hotel at Nassau in the British Bahamas, where he proclaimed, "Oh, I have nothing to hide. Why should I dodge?" Nevertheless, he covered his face while boarding a British overseas airline plane to take him on to Europe, allegedly to investigate Hungarian refugees. Just why he should be so interested in Hungarian refugees to take 3 trips to Europe while a Senate committee was sitting, well, your guess is as good as mine. Now, to understand the life of Dave Beck, you have to know that he came to Seattle during the Alaskan gold rush with his family at the age of 4. He was a red-headed, freckle-faced boy then, quite a contrast from today, whose father cleaned rugs, and he helped the family by selling newspapers. And later, both he and his mother worked in a laundry. He liked school, studied hard, but finally left school to become a laundry driver. That was how he became a Teamster. For those were rough days in the Northwest. The cleaners and dyers works industry was having trouble with the Japanese. One Japanese family established cleaning shops all over Seattle and began to mend clothes free with every suit pressed. It hurt other cleaning establishments, so the Teamsters, then rather a weak union, proceeded to organize the Japanese by the simple process of throwing acid or stink bombs on the clothes if they didn't sign up with the union. In other words, the Teamsters were working with one group of employers against another. It was what they call maintaining order in industry. Well, Dave Beck grew up in that rough, tough school of the Northwest. He became part of a monopoly system which helped both labor if you belonged to the right union, and the employer if you belonged to the right group of employers. Many businessmen swore by Beck, said he was a great influence for stability. In his youth, Beck had studied the IWW, then a rather radical organization which believed in one big union. Beck began to apply the same idea. From driving a truck, his men pushed their way into warehouses, into department stores. From driving beer trucks, it was only a step to organizing the brewery workers, and later, owning beer companies yourself. Even regulating the size of the glass of beer sold in Northwest taverns. That was how Dave Beck's family came to operate some rather important beer distributing companies. The brewery workers had their own union and wanted to remain that way. But Beck, working with the brewery owners, forced his way into the union and made them join the Teamsters. So today, most of America's beer is transported by the Teamsters and brewed by the Teamsters. While the Beck family, one way or another, is in the beer business from brewery to bar. Here's the roll call. Norman Gessert. Dave Beck's nephew is president of Sunset Distributors, which handles the famed Rainier beer in North Seattle. Beck and his wife owned about 1,000 shares of Rainier stock. Then Dave Beck Jr. is president of K&L Beverage Company, which handles various beers, and rather significantly now has a very valuable franchise to handle an Eastern beer, Budweiser. Now, the interesting thing about this is that for years the Teamsters would not let any Eastern beer into the Northwest. If it arrived, it spoiled in the warehouses. It was not distributed. Now, however, Dave Beck's son has a distributorship for Anheuser-Busch of St. Louis. And Dave Beck's wife, Dorothy, also holds stock in K&L Distributors, which sells beer, whiskey, and wines as far north as Alaska. So the Beck family is really right in the beer business, from bar back to brewery, and they don't have any trouble with the union. The Teamsters Constitution, by the way, requires that the president shall devote all his time to the service of the brotherhood. So Dave Beck has thus progressed from the freckle-faced, red-headed youngster who used to help his mother make both ends meet to being a multimillionaire. In a minute, we'll see some of the ways he's done it. Dave Beck is wealthy enough these days to afford many trips abroad, but when he travels, he usually travels at union expense, as when he relaxes in Hawaii. He believes that since his men have prospered and he's helped them to prosper, then he has a right to prosper too. There's no question he's done well for his men, and he's done well for himself. Beck has made his money chiefly in real estate, also by loaning money on automobiles. He's organized the Northwest Securities Corporation, an automobile finance agency which does about $2 million worth of business annually on used cars, new cars, and handles auto insurance. It's a very profitable business. Beck also has organized the D&B Investment Corporation and owns part of the LBG Realty Company. Through them, he acquired a long list of apartment houses, vacant lots, parking lots, beer distributing buildings all around Seattle, and they've made him a fortune. Beck has borrowed most of the money to acquire these buildings, and he's been able to do so at interest rates you and I probably couldn't get, 3.5%. Veterans loans have been paying about 4%. But Beck borrowed the money from the Occidental Life Insurance Company of California, which incidentally has bid and won the health and welfare insurance on most of the Teamsters business in the western states. They insure about 300,000 Teamsters, which is pretty good business, and they seem glad to loan Beck the money. About a year ago, however, Beck seemed to be hard up for cash. It was reported that he had to meet some big income tax payments which he hadn't foreseen. This was reported to be why Beck's swank home in Seattle was sold to the Teamsters for $163,000 and given back to Beck, heated swimming pool and all, to live in the rest of his life. It's also reported to be why Beck next sold his furniture to the Teamsters for $40,000 with the right again to use it the rest of his life. He only had to pay a capital gains tax on these very generous transactions, which of course helped his finances considerably. Now, when the news of this leaked to the press, Beck fired his entire public relations staff. At about the same time that Beck sold his house, he began selling real estate all over Seattle, reportedly to meet his tax bill. Incidentally, it was simultaneous with his reported tax trouble that he came out for Ike. Before that, he'd been quite a Democrat. Now, here is how Beck sold his real estate. Rather complicated, but rather interesting. Here's one transaction. Beck sold a piece of property used by Sunset Beer Distributors on 14th Avenue for $100,000. Of course, his nephew, Norman Gessert, and another union official, Albert Irvine, together with Mrs. Beck's niece, own Sunset Distributors, so the building was kept pretty much in the family. However, the price of $100,000 given to Beck by them made him a nice profit of $55,000 in only 4 years. Then Beck received $225,000 for 2 lots on East Marginal Way, which had been occupied by another of his family beer companies, the K&L Distributing Company. Now, the head of that company just happens to be Dave Beck Jr. So again, it was a sort of a family deal, where Dave Beck Jr. also heads the Cosmopolitan Company, which bought the property. Beck's nephew, Gessert, and a union official, Simon Wampold, also helped to run the company, so it was all kept right in the family. The price they paid of $225,000 gave Beck Sr. a profit of $134,000. Not bad. Now, here's another transaction. Beck made another $107,000 by selling 2 lots to his own union. Now, the lots are right across from the Teamsters headquarters in Seattle, and the deed showed that Beck paid about a dollar each for them, though there may have been some other consideration. It wasn't recorded, however. Now, $1 is rather small, and just who would sell them in 1951 for that price is hard to figure out. because being close to union headquarters, they should have been very valuable. Anyway, the union considered them valuable enough to pay Beck $107,000 in 1956, a very good profit. The transaction caused some people to wonder why the union didn't buy the land in the first place instead of letting Beck acquire it. Well, there were many other real estate sales by Dave Beck, all adding up to the amazing total of $890,715, sold in only 9 months of 55 and 56. They gave Beck an estimated profit of $460,000. A lot of real estate to be sold and a pretty good profit for the head of a labor union, even if it is the biggest union in the world. Well, that's part of the inside story of Dave Beck. I'll have a final word in just a minute. As I reported earlier, Dave Beck is the most disliked man in the labor movement, disliked particularly within the ranks of labor. He also has some trouble from some of his own Teamster officials, but that story will have to come next week.